Please join us in welcoming to the stage Tyler Huggins, CEO and founder of Meati Foods, Aditi Roy, head of content for Sutherland Gold, NICOLAS JAMMET, co-founder of Sweetgreen, and Tom COLICCHIO, owner of Crafted Hospitality.
Hello and welcome, everyone. So nice to have you with us. We are excited to have you with us to dive into this very meaty subject. Yes, I said there and I went there. That pun was intended. We are going to be talking today about this imminent shift in the plant-based ecosystem. And with us to hear about that, we're going to be hearing from these extraordinary three trailblazers, each of them thought leaders in their own right in the food system. We're going to be talking about the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in today, which is that as people are demanding more and more from the foods that they eat, and innovation really has to rise to that challenge. My name is Aditi Roy, and I'm the creator and the co-host of Full Stack Food. It is a podcast about food and innovation. And I want to quickly introduce the gentleman on my left here. On the stage here, we start here with, actually right in the middle, Tom COLICCHIO, chef and owner of Crafted Hospitality and the co-founder of the Independent Restaurant Association. Welcome. Tyler Huggins, next to him, co-founder and CEO of Meati, which makes mushroom root protein, cutlets, and steak. And lastly, NICOLAS JAMMET, who's the co-founder and chief concept officer of Sweetgreen, a favorite in our household, I should say. Well, I think it's fair to assume that many of you may have heard of the work that Tom does, a lot of Top Chef fans here, but we want to also highlight the work of the other two. So I'd love to start with Nick here, and welcome. It's so nice to have you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey into food and how you launched Sweetgreen in the first place.
Sure, thanks for having me. So I started Sweetgreen as a senior in college over 15 years ago. And the idea was simple. Me and two friends were kind of sick of eating the options we had around us, right? The cafeteria was kind of gross. There were a bunch of really great local old spots that we loved but didn't make us feel the best. And so we decided to build a concept and write a business plan for a restaurant that was healthy but also cool and craveable. And as we looked around, we realized that all the options that were the coolest, the most accessible, the most delicious, the places people wanted to eat were all the least healthy. And so we set out to kind of create a different version of that and said, why can't we get all those things in a place that was also healthy? Create a brand around healthy food that was good for you, good for the planet. And so we raised $300,000 as seniors at Georgetown and opened our first restaurant, which was 500 square feet, tiny, an old little burger shack, and started our journey there. And from there, it's been simple. It's been building a brand and building our footprint and really trying to connect people to real food in an exciting and delicious way. And so for us, we've done that by growing to different regions and bringing Sweetgreen to all these different communities around the country, but also trying to rethink the conversation around healthy food and trying to create a brand that can help people connect with food differently and get excited about it. And so ultimately, we've been on this journey for 15 years, and today we're almost at 200 restaurants across 15 plus states. And that sounds big to, from where we started, but it's still very small and very early. So even though we're 15 years in and 200 restaurants in, we kind of see ourselves still being in chapter one. I think there's some really exciting evolutions happening in the food landscape and consumers and how they connect to food. And so we're excited to kind of still be on the beginning of that journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Tyler, I probably know your story the best because we have our podcast episode with Tyler coming out next week. But what I love about your journey is that it is rooted in sustainability from the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having us here today. For me, I've always been a steward of the land, committed to environmental sustainability. Growing up in rural Montana, I probably spent more time outdoors than I did indoors. Every weekend it was hunting, fishing, hiking in the wilderness, that sort of stuff. And then so it was a sort of a logical transition. I went and started working with the Forest Service. I was a field biologist with the Forest Service for about 8 years, studying the land, the health of the land, the impact that humans have on the land. And after studying the problems that we have, I really wanted to take a proactive approach. How do we leverage the beauty that I saw in nature, this efficiency, and direct it in such a way to solve big problems? So I went back to graduate school. I got my PhD in environmental engineering. That's where I met my co-founder, who was getting his PhD in material science. And we connected and said, okay, let's try to figure out a way to leverage nature and solve big problems. That was the bar that we set. We said, whatever we do, agnostic of the past path, let's just make sure that we have global positive impact. That's when we started working with mycelium, or this like thread-like root structure in the soil. And we tried all different kinds of things. Ultimately, we found its biggest impact, the magic that could unleash on the world, was really its nutrition and its ability to produce delicious food. So that was the path that we ended up going into. Now, it wasn't too much of a stretch for me. I grew up, my parents have a grass-fed bison operation, so I saw how good food can be produced and how bad food can be produced. And so really, as we went down this pathway in food, we wanted to focus on how do we leverage this power to make sure it's not only delicious, but it's nutritious and produced in a sustainable way.
That's great. And I love the fact that your parents have a bison ranch and you're doing alternative protein. Tell us a little bit about what drove you into that space of alternative protein. You mentioned mycelium, and in our chat before, you mentioned how when you were looking at mycelium and your ability to kind of solve these big problems, as thinking about it as an engineer, that there's different form factors it could have taken. You even thought about alternative battery materials. So you eventually settled on food and on plant-based meat. Can you talk a little bit about that journey? And now you're in Sprouts markets as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so growing up in a bison ranch, I know what good quality protein is like. And so when we went down this path, we set the bar high. At Meati, we're creating a whole new category of meat. Obviously, it's got to be delicious. It's backed by some of the best chefs in the world, including Tom here. It also is one of the most nutritious meats and debatably one of the most nutrient-dense foods out there. All your protein, all your vitamin Bs, your zinc that you normally get from animal-based products, but then a ton of fiber and other vitamins and minerals you only get from plants. And it's produced in a sustainable way, just a fraction of the land requirement required for conventional meat products.
Awesome. Well, Tom and Nick, I'd love to hear from you about your respective journeys into plant-based proteins specifically, and what brought you to that. Was it from consumers, suppliers? Was it your own kind of information and learnings? Tom, we'll start with you.
Sure. One thing I do want to point out, Nicholas left something really important. I grew up in a restaurant family. I've known your mother for about 35 years, and if I didn't mention that, she would get upset at me. Sure. I think I've known her longer than you're alive. So over the years, listen, obviously, I serve a lot of meat in my restaurants, and we like to think that we're buying from sustainable sources. But so my journey to Meati, it was really from an environmental standpoint, knowing the sort of the detriment that we're causing to our environment by the way we're producing food, and so it was something that I was interested in. I also was curious about mycelium after watching the Paul Stamets doc. And so my wife was was doing a lot of research around mycelium, and so it was something that I knew about. And then Nicholas introduced me to Tyler, and as an investment opportunity. And I had a quick conversation with Tyler and made a decision after a 5-minute conversation, mostly because it was something that was completely different. Mycelium is so nutritious, and so as our the world, the population is just growing. We have to find alternative ways to feed people, and especially high-quality protein, because there's going to come to a point where we don't have enough land, and we're clear-cutting palm trees in South America to produce meat. And so, we have to find a sustainable way to produce protein. And to me, it was a no-brainer. And then I sent some of the product to my house to try it, and it just so happened that my wife's cousins were over who are all vegans, and so I cooked it up, and they were like, "This is amazing. Where can we get more of this?" And so it was a pretty easy thing for me. And Tyler touched on it. It has to be delicious. If it's not delicious, it's not going to sell. Also, if you're going to create a meat substitute that is overly processed, that is creating the same detriment to the environment, what's the point? And so mycelium, it's unlimited. There's unlimited amounts of mycelium. And so it's a matter of now making sure you're creating a product that not only tastes great, but texture was also something that was so important, because I think a lot of these substitutes that we see, they don't have texture.
Yeah.
And this does. It eats like meat.
Yeah.
And so it was really exciting to see that. And I'm just along for the ride now at this point. And also, it was great that that Tyler also what sold me on it was that he was from a ranching family.
Yeah.
And so, because typically ranchers would rail against this and fight against it. And it's interesting, there's another investment that I made in a seafood company where the two women are in the seafood industry, and they're trying to come up with alternatives. And so to me, this story just made perfect sense. And my next phase is looking forward to how I can actually work this into my restaurant setting. I mean, I have some ideas to do pop-ups specifically focused on this. I'm also really interested in the cold cuts and things like that, because there's a whole lot of things out there that you can make from the mycelium. So it's just to me, just an opportunity on so many different levels.
You're making us all hungry too, right? Just listening to this, I'm glad that it passed the kitchen test in Tom Colicchio's kitchen. So we'd love to talk to you, Nick, about your journey into plant-based proteins. How did that come about?
I would say we're at Sweetgreen for the past 15 years. So much of our product has been very focused on vegetables as the heroes, vegetables and grains at the center of our plate, but center of our bowl. But we also do serve meat. And I think, our broader food ethos has not been to lean into any of these extreme diets or any extreme point of views around food, and just understand that we believe the food system does have to evolve, right? For the sake of the planet, for the sake of customers and their personal health. And so much of, when we look at the connections between food and healthcare, for us, we see this just necessary evolution in what people are eating, their connection to the food, their understanding of it, and how nutrient dense it is. And so we've always been just curious about a lot of the innovations happening in food, and we've stayed close to especially this category over the last many years, and we have tasted and tried everything. And honestly, to Tom's point, a lot of them, whether it was texture or flavor, or the biggest factor was always also like the nutrient profile and the macros. And none of them really fit our food ethos. Some of them might have tasted good, maybe some of them had good texture, but the macros were really lacking in so many of them. And so, when I met Meati and Tyler, it was the first time where the idea was really exciting, the power of mycelium and mushrooms. But understanding that it kind of checked the boxes in all three of those things, it was the first time we took one of these seriously. And, for us, so much of our food ethos at Sweetgreen it's not about being, fully plants or we want to create a range of options on our menu for everyone. Even when we think about proteins, for us, it's not about leaning all the way to vegetarian and vegan. We are a very vegetarian and vegan friendly menu, but we want to have a range of products that can connect to any consumer eventually, right? If our ambitions are to be a place that can serve everyone, we have to make sure that we have that range of food that ultimately is very delicious, but anyone can self-select into their journey on the menu. So when we finally tried Meati, it was really exciting because clicked all the boxes. This idea of like whole muscle meat, whole muscle protein was really exciting from a texture point of view. And at the end of the day, it just tasted really good and made you feel good. And we felt good about it from an ethos point of view. So we actually tested it on our menu in December, and it did really well. So I was excited to see that. But I think so much of it's really exciting to understand some of these innovations that are happening in food. And so for us, that curiosity around where food is going, where it needs to go, and ultimately what the consumer wants, I think is really important.
It's so interesting because I understand how notable it must be for you to include a plant-based protein on your menu, because when I go there every week to Sweetgreen and you see turkey meatballs and you see the 2 types of chicken, you see the blackened tofu, which is excellent, but you really don't see anything else. So this must have been pretty novel. How much did you consider the fact that your brand is known for whole, natural, organic foods, and to bring in something in a different category, the education of your customers and things, how much of that consideration come into play?
I would say over the years, we introduced a lot of ingredients on our menu that sometimes can be hard to talk about. We did a whole campaign with David Chang around like kelp and like seaweed and how climate positive it is. We bred a vegetable with Dan Barber, the kogi nut squash, and talked about how like soil health and breeding seeds for flavor. And so some of these things can be pretty heady, but at the end of the day, the thing that connected all those things was we were serving them in a product that just tasted really good and trying to tell stories about important ingredients that we think are good for the food system, but also good for the customer. And so, Meati is one that's it's harder to talk about than some of the other ingredients, but at the same time, it's almost simpler. It's the idea of mushrooms and mycelium is pretty clear and super clean to talk about. And so, you know, I think, especially when you compare it to some of the other options in the alternative protein category, I think there's a lot to explain there. But so, you know, I think, and also to Tom's point, the energy and conversation around mushrooms and the power of mushrooms is only getting louder. And so I think this feeds perfectly into that. And I think consumers understand that it's a pretty straightforward, direct source of protein. And seeing it in this form, I think, is incredibly novel.
And I like how you said it's getting louder. People are learning more and more about it, and there's more of an appetite for it. As we head into the future of animal and animal-free protein, Tyler, there's a lot of high-profile options out there. You know better than anyone else. There's cultivated meat, which is just about to break through in the U.S., but available in other places globally. Fermentation, obviously, which is what you're doing. There are still the players like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. As you look at all of these different options, can you kind of walk us through what some of the drivers to success are?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the world needs a new food revolution. You know, over the last 100 years or so, we've gotten really good at producing food at bulk, safely, and at the volume required to get food to most everybody. But what's happened is we have got really good at producing calorie-dense food, but nutrient-poor food, and in a manner that is ultimately bad for the environment and not sustainable. So what we need from this new food revolution is, we're not going back to the land. We're not going back to where we're hunters and gatherers anymore. So we need to be at scale. We need to produce safe food, but it needs to be whole food and healthy, and obviously highly delicious and affordable for everybody. And so I think what we're seeing with approaches like what we're taking, what others like you mentioned, is where we can produce food that is highly nutritious at the scale that's required to get in front of everybody. And I'm really excited to see, you know, there's no one silver bullet. I'm really excited about what other folks in the mycelium space are doing. I think you're gonna see a lot of cool innovation come out of that. I really like what I'm seeing out of precision fermentation, you know, especially methods in which you're leveraging nature and you're keeping it whole food. But again, at a scale that's required and at an efficiency that's required to be sustainable, I think we're going to see a lot of exciting things happen over the next few years.
You mentioned the scale and efficiency. It's one thing to come out with this groundbreaking technology that you can retain the wholeness of food and also provide an alternate to protein. But what about the scale and getting to the efficiencies? How big of challenges are those two things?
It's extremely difficult, I mean, especially at the speed that's required, right? So not only do we need large volumes, we need it fast, we need it now. And that requires building out the infrastructure. You know, for what we're doing, we're bringing it all in-house. We grow this mycelium, or what we call mushroom root, in-house in a very clean and, I mean, this is almost beyond organic. This is purified water. We protect it from any sort of pollutants. We grow it all in-house. And then we do a simple downstream processing, again, where we can retain that whole food quality. But there's no infrastructure that exists to leverage. We have to build it all of ourselves. That's capital intensive, that's time intensive, and those are two things, you know, are hard to get right now.
And I know that your product there's so much demand for your product, which is incredible. Well, the rest of you, all of you guys are on the front lines. And as you look into the future of animal-free protein, are there macro influences that are playing into all of this? Things like trends in food overall, cuisine, regionality, and of course, supply chains. You're all constrained by that. I'm curious about some of the observations and the types of discussions that you're seeing. Nick, we can start with you.
Yeah, you know, I think if you look at the last, 10 years specifically for me, there's always these like spike in trends that sound like they're going to be really big, but it kind of always comes back to just food that tastes really good for customers. And right, some of the trends on being more plant-based or being like alternative proteins, these things that do spike, and there's a lot of, you know, innovation and investment and conversation and noise and marketing around them. They will continue to grow, but ultimately what drives, I think, behavior and drives change and drives like sustainable growth of a brand or a like category is just the product being really delicious. Mm-hmm. And then I think sometimes what you see in some of these food trends is sometimes the conversation can be more aggressive or extreme, which I think makes for good marketing sometimes. And I think sometimes in the world of alternative proteins, there's this conversation of like, we need to end eating meat. We need to like stop, you know, and yes, there's a revolution in how we produce food. We do need to innovate how food is produced and ultimately how it's served and the effect it has on someone's health. But I think sometimes the extreme point of view has the unintended the opposite effect on turning customers off. And so one of my favorite parts of the Meati story and meeting Tyler was his whole perspective on the broad spectrum of just the protein landscape, and how Meati is a solution to remove some pressure on how we've been forced to raise animals and produce meat, and this race to the bottom on price. But it's not about eliminating people from eating meat. Right? And so I think I love that balanced, thoughtful, sustainable, and realistic approach. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it just has to be delicious. And that's what's going to take something from a small trend to a broader movement.
Thank you. Tom, you've seen it all in terms of trends and the fads and all of that stuff, and you were an avid investor in this space, so you really have your finger on the pulse with those innovations. What are your observations about trends in food overall and what's going to be sticking?
The trend with alternative proteins. The trends with alternative proteins, I think that too often it's marketed to vegans. And to really gain traction, we need to market this to sort of the everyday eater. I know just at home, I'm eating either much smaller portions of meat, pork, chicken, and fish, and focusing more on vegetables. But and there are a lot of people that are visiting. We did a vegan pop-up with Chef Chloe at one of our restaurants, and there was lines out the door. Half the people there were not vegans. Wow. They were just there because it was delicious food. There was an excitement in the air, and I was talking to a lot of people out there, and most of them were not vegans. And so I think for this really to gain traction, this has to be, and I think Tyler hit the nail on the head. This is an alternative. This is a new category, and it needs to be treated as a new category. You can't pigeonhole this. And I think that there are so many people out there that are, again, especially younger generation, they want to know where their food's from, they want to know how it's produced, and they want to know the effect it has on the environment. That's what they're looking at. And so this is I think Tyler's is one step ahead of the trends right now. We're creating a trend. We're not following trends. And I think that's important. And I think also knowing that you have to scale this. This can't be something that's precious, that's going to go to some fancy restaurants and no one's going to know about it. Yeah. This has to go to the average person who is going to make a choice between buying a pork chop, buying a steak, and buying Meati. Yeah. And that's when you can not only scale the product that you're creating, but you're actually going to create a scale demand for it. Because it has to go along. And my understanding is that there's a pretty robust pipeline of people that are just begging for it. And I'll have to say, over the last couple of years, I've been given a lot of meat alternatives, and a lot of it is just awful. I taste it when I won't say who. I tasted it the other day. My assistant and I were tasting it. I cooked it up at home, and we both were like, "Oh God, this is a hard no." It's happening. And I think it's going to happen quicker than we think. And I think what's going to happen, and we're seeing it now, meat prices are just going through the roof because feed is just going through the roof. And so I think it's not a trend that we're following, it's a trend that we're creating.
You mentioned the prices, which I think is so key to that accessibility and scaling and making sure that it really goes to the mass consumer, because that's what we're going for. Tom, staying with you, how critical of a piece is achieving that price parity?
It's really important. If that was the problem with cultured beef. The price is so expensive, you can't bring it to market. And yes, the price is coming down, but it's still crazy expensive. I was actually involved very, very early on with that. I was supposed to cook the first burger, and then decided to have a scientist do it instead of a chef. Price is really important, because also people will try something if the price is okay. If it's crazy expensive, they're not going to go out and take a risk. That's too high of a risk to take. And so price is really important. One thing I forgot to mention early on, my love with mushrooms. If someone asks what my favorite thing is to eat and cook, I'll say mushrooms. People also roll their eyes and go, like they're expecting steak or fish or something. Mushrooms.
Has that always been the case?
Always been the case.
Really?
My grandfather was a forager. He was a truck driver for PSE&G, and they were putting all the utility lines in northern New Jersey. He would, on his time off, because he wasn't a technician, he would just drive the truck there, and so he would go out in the woods and forage. And so growing up, we always had wild mushrooms.
How?
He had a way of determining whether or not they were good to eat, and he would put a penny and a nickel in water and put the mushrooms in there. My grandfather's not with us anymore, but it wasn't the mushrooms that killed him. but it wasn't a very scientific way of deciding, what to feed your family. At least this is what he told us. I think he was like kind of pulling our leg.
Is it just because mushrooms absorb a lot of butter?
Exactly. Yeah, this is true. This is true. No, I just something about them. I have my theory is when you're a kid, after a rainstorm, right? There's a mud pile. You make a mud pie, right? Who hasn't tasted that mud pie? You do. You put it in your mouth. You taste it. It tastes like dirt. Mushrooms. It's the closest you can get to eating earth, and I think there's a back brain sort of part of you that wants to get back to the earth.
Yeah.
If you're gardening and you're getting your hands in the dirt, it has all kinds of health benefits just by putting your hands in dirt. And so this is the closest thing that you can do. Now, if you can take that and scale it,
Yeah.
it's a home run.
Gold mine there, right? I would love to hear from Tyler, Nick, about the price issue. I know we've talked about this before. Nick, people always think about organic as being so expensive and inaccessible. In the last 10 years, I do know that the gap between organic and conventional has narrowed definitely. But in terms of price parity, I mean, if it may be unrealistic that you will achieve complete parity, how important is that customer education piece of it? I know we've talked about that before.
Yeah, I think, I agree with Tom on price parity, but I think to your point, there's also price value. And I think making sure that, and we face this challenge at Sweetgreen every day. We invest so much in parts of our supply chain and our prep and these ingredients that we just need to make sure that we share that with the customer and get credit for it, because it is baked into your price. I think understanding your consumer in general and what they want, what they value, where they do place value on your food and your product, aside from it being delicious, is so incredibly important. I think ultimately to get to scale, you got to get to price parity. Do you need to start there on day one? No. I think you've seen a lot of successful brands and products start more premium and then trickle down, but I think that journey can go slower or faster, but you do need to get to price parity. But ultimately, I think the why in the price value equation is the most important part.
Yeah. Tyler, how are you thinking about price parity and value and all of these things as you're making your product?
I mean, it's super important. I mean, our goal is to get this product in the hands of everybody. We set a mission for global positive change, and we mean that. The way we built this was built on a process that's scalable, where we can truly meet the supply to meet the demand, and that requires a lot of supply. I mean, there's somewhere around 100 billion pounds of meat consumed in the United States alone. You've got to think really big if you really want to get out there and get it to the price point that is affordable to everybody. And then I think you have widespread adoption and excitement around it.
Yeah. Well, there have been a lot of buzzy headlines lately about plant-based meats. We're hearing about cutbacks and layoffs, stalling sales, things of that nature. Is this for Meati or just for the entire sector, is this a setback or an opportunity for you? Are people painting everyone with the same brush, or is this an opportunity to really educate consumers?
We hear unequivocally from consumers, they want diversity in their diet. They want food that is healthy. They want food that is produced, that is beneficial on the land and the environment. They're just not going to compromise on flavor and taste. I mean, that has to be number one, and then the other two have to follow quickly there behind. And so there is a ton of demand out there. It is not a demand problem. You've got to hit it's got to be delicious, it's got to be accessible, and then it's got to be highly nutritious. And we've been able to check all those boxes. We see a ton of excitement from our early customers and partners. Retailers and food service partners like Nick know their customer better than anybody, and they know the demand is there. They just haven't found the right product yet I would argue until Meati. We're just rolling out to all Sprouts locations, as you mentioned. We're going to stay close to consumers, and I think we're going to be surprised by the excitement, or we're not going to be surprised by the excitement that we see from the market.
Yeah. Awesome.
I think, let me just jump in here. I think some of the problems that those companies had is, the stock market during the pandemic was just through the roof, and they were sort of valued as a tech company, and they're not. It's a food company, and so their valuations come way down. Way down. And that's the problem. And so, you know, I think that yes, there's a lot of tech that goes into creating some of these products, but it shouldn't be traded as a, you know, tech valuation. It doesn't make sense.
That's an interesting point. And also, some of these companies that are experiencing these things, the criticism against them is that they are more processed. So is that an opportunity for the work that you're doing to distinguish yourselves? That hey, this is alternative protein, but it's not processed. It's very simple and it's a whole food.
Yeah, that was the bar we set. It had to be. Again, it has to be delicious, but then it has to be whole food, real food from nature. And then we looked out in nature and said, what else is out there that we can leverage? Mm-hmm. The great thing about the type of mycelium that we use is actually was consumed by cultures for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It grows after wildfires. It's one of the first things grows after wildfires. I mean, it's pretty cool. And we were able to pluck it from nature and, again, find a way to grow it safely, securely, and at its peak nutritional quality.
I will say, just talking about this kind of first generation of alternative proteins, I do think there was this big boom, and part of it was like people would read about like they have like 10x the demand that they can produce, and they went public, and these companies, it was a narrative around just like the boom of that category. I do think on the consumer side, one of the things I observed was, I think there was this kind of like confusion between the sustainability benefits and then this faux healthy halo. Mm-hmm. And I think that to the point of it being like some of these options being highly processed and not very nutritionally dense, I think customers were rushing to the option being like, better for the planet, better for you, kind of sometimes merge to be the same thing. Mm-hmm. And then you'd quickly realize, okay, this actually doesn't make me feel good, or this isn't good for me. And I think that this faux healthy halo did wear off a little bit.
And someone was telling me that, the counterpoint to that is also that if you look at just conventional meat, that one of the most popular and best-selling products are Tyson chicken nuggets or Tyson products, right, which have a lot of processing involved. So if you're going to go after a mass market, the first thing to go after before you get to whole cuts is maybe some of the more processed stuff. So I guess there's an argument to be made for that.
Yeah, and I will say this whole first generation, I think what they did for the consumer connection and creating that shift and that trial was really exciting. I think it pushed a whole group of consumers and a conversation around willingness to even try this kind of food in a really exciting direction. And there's going to be new players that emerge like Meati, and then it's going to force those other companies to also evolve.
Yeah, and we want to remind the audience, and I see some of you are doing that already, that you can put your questions for this panel by going into your South by Southwest app and going into Slido to enter your questions. We're going to get to some of those questions. But first, this is interesting to me because you guys are all creators, because your product that you're creating is food. How do you, it's always a balance between art and science when you're a creator. So how do you balance data, which everyone's mad after, and you obviously have troves of data on your customers and what your customers like and what they're like and all that stuff. How do you take that customer data and assimilate that with your own intuition and experiences and knowledge about food? How do you do that? And who's the audience that you're creating for? Anyone can answer this. Tom, I see you laughing.
I was hoping somebody else would go first. We have data on our customers, but we're not a large company, so we're not sifting through data points, and that's really informing us. I try to cook delicious food, and quite frankly, I like to cook food that I like, and I'm hoping that other people like it as well. But what we do is we're constantly changing and evolving our menu. Again, we're small, so we can do that, and each restaurant does the chefs are have free will to a certain extent to sort of create. And so for us, it's seasonal. It's what we feel like eating. It's what's fresh. It's what's in the market. And the reality of it is that protein doesn't really drive that, because protein doesn't change.
Yeah.
Right. We may buy lamb from a better rancher. Mm-hmm. We may get our beef from a better rancher, or chicken that's cleaner, but the flavor of it doesn't really change that much. Yeah. And so for us, it's all produce first. That's what we're looking at first. And so if I'm making a menu, I'm putting a list of produce that's coming in season. I'll usually make a list of mushrooms that are in season too. I'm looking forward to the first morel. And then proteins come last, and then we just and from there it's just creative. But for me, being creative for me it's visual. I need to see things. It's hard for me just to sit in a room and start writing a menu. I need to go walk through a farmer's market, even a supermarket. Yeah. I need visual cues, or it's hard for me to create. Especially now that you're running a business, and you're also trying to be creative at the same time. Yeah. They're different sides of the brain, and they don't often mix.
Yeah.
But to your point, you eat with your eyes first. How many times have I heard that, right? Well, Nick, I know Sweetgreen eaters have high standards. I know because I'm one of them, and my two kids, ages 8 and 3, they're brand evangelizers for Sweetgreen. I'm curious about your menu, and it seems like your menus have to be innovative and thoughtful. That's just table stakes for you guys. So how do you guys think about incorporating new foods and items? And again, that customer data piece versus the intuition. For instance, like the za'atar breadcrumbs are amazing, and the crispy rice, those are my two favorites. I can't imagine, did that come out of focus groups? Like, how did those things come about?
You know, it's an interesting process. It's definitely a balance of art and science. I would say over the years, we've leaned more into science at times and then more into art. And we have a lot of data on our customers. I mean, you know, majority of our business is digital. And so we have this deep understanding of our customer from like a quantitative point of view. We also do spend a lot of time talking to our customers like qualitatively and just understanding what drives them, what drives their behavior, what do they value, what do they want. And so for us, when we think about menu innovation and evolving our offering, it is this balance of listening to the customer, but then also like using our own intuition and the art to say like, where do we want to lead them? So it's like that balance of the two things. The fact that we put kelp on the menu, like there's no focus group, no data ever said like, if you put kelp on the menu, you're going to sell it. That was us understanding a story and an ingredient in food that we wanted to tell. I mean, right now in our menu changes seasonally based on the regionality and just like seasonality of produce around the country. And right now we have this warm roasted winter veg mix. And in some parts of the country it has rutabaga, some parts it has sunchokes, and is one of our best selling bowls of the year. And if you would have told me like in a fast food setting you'd be selling a lot of sunchokes, I don't know if you can like find that in any other fast food menu. That was not from any customer focus group or any data telling us put sunchokes on your menu, you're going to sell a lot of it. I would obviously argue a lot of customers don't even know what our sunchokes are. But we spent time with the farmers in the field, and they said, you know, we rotate this in our crop for X, Y, and Z reasons, and I wish there was a bigger market for sunchokes. And we said, we'll buy them, we'll make them delicious, and we'll talk about them. And so, but at the same time, we also talk to our customers, and we understand the number one thing they ask for is steak and more proteins. So we've been really, you know, trying to be thoughtful about how we evolve our protein offering. But again, I think it is this balance of, you know, listening to the customer, but then also leading them.
That's so interesting. I'm glad for the sunchokes, by the way. They are delicious. And I'm also curious in terms of storytelling. You mentioned that about like the customers telling. Storytelling is important. If I walk into a Sweetgreen, I see a story. The ingredients are listed on that black chalkboard and what farms they're from, that's a story. I also look, your kitchen is open, so I literally see people cutting a fresh avocado in front of me. How much, I'm sure that was all intentional to bring the customer on that journey and tell that story and the education. How much of that storytelling piece is critical in the work that you do in building that brand?
It's one of the most important things. And for us, it is like, we think about it in so many dimensions, from the visual cues you see when you walk into a restaurant, to what's on the menu board, to how what the food looks like, to the prep you see happening. That's all very intentional. I would say the rest of how, you know, the other parts of and the other dimensions of storytelling are evolving pretty quickly. You know, I think, you know, traditional media versus, you know, how consumers today, especially younger generations, are consuming information and content, whether it's like full articles versus like Axios or, you know, obviously like TikTok generation. So it's even forcing us to really continue to evolve how we tell our stories around our food and you know, why there's so much value there. Yeah,
there's definitely a TikTok opportunity there. I have not gone there with my daughters, but I think they'll want to at some point. Tyler, how do you think about the customer? I mean, you've been iterating on this product and looking at how are you balancing that data that's coming in from customers with, again, your own knowledge and intuition. And you have a built-in focus group with your parents on that bison ranch as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's food. It's got to be something that's enjoyable and something that people want. So you have to listen to your customer and give them, you know, ultimately what they're looking for. You know, luckily, in the meat category, you have thousands of years, I mean, of data that shows that as humans we like meat. It's very clear. The unique thing for us is like, well, we have a blank canvas we can work off of. Do you want something that tastes like chicken? Do you want something that tastes like steak? Do you want a pork? What ultimately do you want? We can, you know, we have the luxury to be able to kind of tune it and to just give you delicious meat. I'm really excited to see how media evolves from what we have now to give you something that you're familiar with, to build some excitement and buzz and awareness about what we're doing. But we're going to listen. What else would you like to see? Because we have the luxury to be able to bring new innovative products out to market very rapidly.
And what do your parents think of the product?
I mean, it's
They
delicious.
must be the toughest critics.
It's
right?
delicious. It's hard not to like. And I think given the uniqueness of our approach as well, I think is very helpful. You know, Nick commented on this a little bit, but you know, our mission is to bring, you know, good energy from the ground up.
Yeah.
We're not here to replace animal-based meat. We're here to complement it. Yeah. And you know, I think it's a great approach. And as long as you're not out there attacking someone's way of life, and you're saying, hey, you know, we're American ranchers just like you. We're producing meat just like you. I think that is a great approach, and you see that, you know, people are really embracing. Again, it's delicious and it's really good for me. What's not there to like?
Making it inclusive, everyone coming under the umbrella, right? Well, Tom, you've been on the bleeding edge of food for so many years. You've witnessed trends. You've seen lasting changes. You recognize food that people love. What are your thoughts, and what are some predictions that you have in plant-based proteins moving forward?
I'm pretty excited about the space. Yeah. People, I think the average person is just really concerned, and I think more from an environmental standpoint than anything else. Yes, they want nutrition. Yes, they want to be able to feed their food, their family wholesome meals. But again, what's happening in the environment is something that I think a lot of people are coming to the alternative space because of that, the alternative meat and protein space because of that. And I think that's going to continue. You know, you got some big players entering the space too. I mean, Bill Gates is entering the space, and so it's going to happen. And the question is, you know, who's gonna be the leaders in the space? Because it is getting crowded. Who's going to be the leaders? Who's going to do something that is I think more interesting? But again, it's going to come from flavor. I think there's going to come a point in time where you're going to have a couple different choices to make, and your choice is going to go to whatever tastes best, and whoever is going to be more innovative. But I'm excited for the space, and what I'm excited is Tyler put together a culinary council. David Chang is on it. He was supposed to actually be here today, but he's I guess injured. He injured his back or something. You know, he actually has it on his menu already. And working with it. David is very innovative, and but David also doesn't really care what his customers think so much. But that works for him in some strange way. And there's a lot of chefs that are. You know, you feel it bubbling up. Yeah. You hear a lot of chefs talking about it, and so I think we'll see more and more of it on menus. But I think also because customers are going to start demanding it. In our steakhouse in Las Vegas, we have two meat alternatives. One is a bolognese that we make. So we're in our steakhouse we have it.
Wow.
Because people are sometimes going there because it's a business event, and they're vegan or vegetarians, and so we have to have an option. And I think more and more you're seeing restaurants at the level that I'm cooking in that the customers are demanding plant-based alternatives. You can't ignore it anymore. Yeah. And so the question is, you can make some half-assed dish and they get pissed off at you and when they're paying money for it and they're never going to come back, or you can actually do something really cool. And so instead of just giving them vegetables on a plate, you can say, hey, we got a new product. We have something that's really new that is beyond plant-based. It's a new category. We'll think you'll love it. And so you can get people to start sort of adapt and changing their diets. Then when they realize that they can go to the store and buy this, they don't have to go to a restaurant for it, then it's a win-win.
And I'm curious that in terms of that education and the mass adoption, does that start with thought leaders like you talking about it, serving it in your restaurants, putting on social media?
I think that's a piece of it. Yeah. But I think a lot of it is educating the public. Yeah. And it's how much marketing are you going to put behind this, because it's going to need a lot of it. Yeah. Especially if it's something that's new, because you'll get people go, I don't eat mushrooms. It's not really a mushroom either. It doesn't taste like a mushroom. And so there's a lot of education that has to go along when you're introducing something new. But I think it's going to come from all sides. You're going to have to find, thought leaders. You're going to find chefs. You're going to have to find nutritionists. You're going to have to find ranchers. You're going to have to find a lot of people who are going to sort of all at once coalesce around a product like this to really get it to market.
Great. Well, we are going to go to audience questions now, and I'm going to read the top one. Question for Tyler: how can we prepare the farming industry to embrace this opportunity and increase the farming of mushrooms and mycelium to support scalability?
Yeah, I think the approach is key here. You know, we're not anti-meat, we're pro-mushroom root. Yeah. You know, we're not, and we're pro-good meat. You know, I don't think there's this evil conspiracy that ranchers and farmers want to go out there and degrade the land and torture animals. There's just a lot of pressure on the commodity market. We have to produce a lot of meat to feed a lot of people. And so I think it's a combination. Again, I think we're here to produce a new type of meat, a new type of food alongside all the other food producers in the United States, and to help take some of that pressure off of these producers. I mean, it is not easy to be a farmer and rancher. I mean, just this year alone, I saw 2 or 3 of our neighbors go out of business. You know, and so if we can take some of that pressure off, they can do what they're actually really, really good at, and that's working on the land, working with animals, you know, using good practices, and ultimately producing really high quality meat. Now I think what we're trying to promote here is that you maybe don't consume a grass-fed ribeye every day. You know, you have it as a celebration. You have it on the weekends or whenever, but you're going to pay a little bit more for it. And then for your daily go-to protein source, you have products like Meati and other products that are going to come out in the market.
Great. Question for Tom. Meati or mycelium is a new food. What does it take for a new food to break through and stick around and become part of people's regular diets?
Yeah, I think we just kind of touched on that. But also, just to be clear, this isn't made from mushrooms. You don't grow mushrooms and then ferment them. I mean, it's different than a mushroom that's actually floured.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. So we all know the mushroom cap itself, right? We're very familiar with that. But in the soil is this root-like, thread-like structure called mycelium. Our type of mycelium we call mushroom root. This is where, you know, again, you have that fibrous texture, the high nutritional content, in which we're able to make a delicious meat product out of.
Right, and it's everywhere, right?
And every square inch of the soil.
Network is everywhere. If you look at soil, it's in there. And so it's not something that you're growing; it's something you're just collecting, really harvesting.
It's as old as dirt itself. And what we've done is we've plucked it from nature, we bring it in house, and we grow it in water. And so we protect it again from environmental contamination. You know, the challenge is even if you have a wonderful organic tomato, it's still exposed to all sorts of different stuff. We bring our mushroom root in house. We only have a purified water, only the cleanest food for it to eat, and this is as pure as it gets.
Next question. Are there examples of foods that have been successful because of digital and social media? We are in a different place today than a few years ago. If you want to think about it, we can skip to a next one as well. For Nick and Tom, how do you determine what percentage of your menus should be plant-based? Do you think of percentages, or is it just, again, more intuitive?
You know, I think it goes back to just understanding our customer and getting some of the data there to understand, you know, how they're eating, what choices they wish they had, and then where their behavior is, you know, what they're substituting in certain bowls, what they're adding, like understanding all that behavior data will drive, I think, where some of the opportunities are. But we don't think about it exactly in percentages. For us, it's about making sure we have a broad enough range of options that fits every customer's needs and wants. Yeah,
let me answer that question a little differently. It's not about the percentage that's on the menu. It's about the percentage that's on the plate. We went from having usually 8 ounces of protein on a plate to now going down to 6 or even 4, and having more vegetables and more grains sort of take not necessarily the center, but more on the plate in terms of creating flavor, creating textures, and creating the bulk of the plate. And so it's really the percentage on that individual dish versus the menu that we're focused on.
Great. Next question. This is a little bit of a tough one, but I'll see if you guys want to take a crack at it. Why has the framework always been meat substitute versus a standalone food? It's a good question. Does anyone want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, because meat is I think it's easy to explain the story, and that's why I love that Tyler's not telling that story. This is a different food, but it's just to get the consumer to come along. It's like, oh, here's the substitute.
The reference
point. What's a substitute?
Yeah.
And so that's what's great about Meati.
Yeah, we have a great billboard that's that has been put up recently. That Meati is meat-like for meat lovers. I think that really sums it up, right? We are really trying to say we're creating a new type of meat, a new category of meat that has all the attributes that are associated with meat, right? That texture, the juiciness. You can grill it, you can pan fry it, you can do all sorts of stuff. You know, you can only introduce so much innovation at one time, right? And so I think giving something to consumers that's familiar, you know the recipes, you can pull it from your mom's favorite recipe book or whatever, and that's a great way to get started. Now, ultimately, again, we can make meat delicious, and that'll be our goal over time.
Yeah, I think also substitute, because it was marketed to vegans. And so this was the substitute, right? But you can't only market to vegans. If you want to create a market, you have to go much broader than that.
Nick, do you have any thoughts on just the framing thing? Because again, you are at a place that's known for your greens and whole foods and things like that. Do you think it does better products like this, like animal-free proteins, if they are more marketed as a standalone food versus a substitute for meat?
Yeah, when you look at the full range for us, it's like proteins that are non-animal proteins. There's everything from like legumes and falafel, and so things that customers understand. I think to Tom's point, it was just referential for a certain group of consumers to sell it. Also, even like when those companies were thinking of like fundraising, it's easy to understand alternative meat. All right, the meat industry is this big. Great. It's understanding, just like referencing what you're trying to mimic or replace for a certain type of consumer, and the hope is that you would broaden that consumer. But I think for me, at the end of the day, it just comes down to having that range and ultimately just having things that taste good.
Yeah, and the CNBC reporter in me also points out that it's a $1 trillion global meat market, right? So obviously for potential investors and everything, and that's always a draw. Okay, next question. What do you all see as potential meat alternatives version 2? Is there anything outside of the space besides mycelium that has any potential? There's probably a ton of stuff that has potential, right?
This is going to be tough, right? Because if you're trying to create meat, it's got to have that texture. That's been the challenge so far on the first version is, when you look out into plants for that purpose, plants actually aren't that good at producing protein. So you have to extract it and you have to concentrate it, and then you just lost all the texture. You have to build that texture back up. So if you look out into nature and say what else has the texture that you're looking for to produce and give you that experience of meat, I'm sure there's something else out there. Obviously mycelium provides that for you, and then in the end it has to be scalable, and scalable at the required volumes to truly make an impact. So I'm really hoping there's some other options out there, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
That chewiness, though, you got to get that chewiness, the mouthfeel, right? Yep. Okay, well.
I'm laughing at the third one.
Yeah.
The third one. Do you want to answer?
That's for Tyler.
Any chance Joel and or Ellie from The Last of Us can be convinced to eat and endorse Meati?
We weren't going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Listen, The Last of Us, it's a great show. I love watching it myself. But it's science fiction.
Yeah.
If something like that was ever going to happen, it would already have. It's a very difficult process. It's very unlikely. And the thing is, too, when it comes to fungi and mycelium, there's millions of different types out there. Ours in particular is the friendliest type, which we love and is delicious, and I think you'll get anybody to like it.
It's also puzzling to me that you have to actually have an explanation. I mean, do you guys get that at all in a non-joking way?
About the
question about the show? Are people actually worried, or?
I actually haven't really seen people that worked up about it, yeah.
Good question, though. All right, what is the next one?
I haven't seen, we sell a lot of mushrooms in our restaurant. I haven't seen a drop in sales because of it.
Because of the last, okay, good. We have that data point.
That's anecdotal, but
hey,
that's what I'm going on.
Exactly. Well, startup valuation. Plant-based startups have more impacts on our planet than usual tech startups. How do you pitch yourself, and how do you choose investors? That's probably, well, that's a question for all of you, I guess.
Yeah, I think, again, for us, we set the bar very high for global positive change. I mean, obviously, there's an attractive value proposition in doing that. Then as far as picking the investors, I mean, we were really particular on the investors we brought in. You had to be mission aligned with us. You had to have a long-term vision of what we were trying to do, and take our time and also take big swings. I mean, to build out what we call our mega ranch, able to produce tens of millions of pounds of product. That was a really bold move to build that basically, with only a few dollars in sales. And so you have to have the mission alignment, and I think that's super important if you want to make an impact in this category.
All right. How are you thinking about penetration in low-income countries' markets in the long term?
I mean, that's the goal. For sure. You know, in the U.S., we're not really protein deficient, right? Obviously, there are areas that have low access to good quality food, and that is of concern. We want to make sure we get our product there as well. But where we are really going to make our impact is when we get outside the United States. Again, given the fact that we can sort of separate our production from the environment, meaning we can build these mega ranches anywhere in the world, and we can produce it at a price point that should be accessible to anybody. It's just going to take time, and that's where we're trying to move as fast as we can. We're trying to build out the infrastructure required to do so, but it's going to take a lot of time and money, and then support from our customers as well.
And getting from 0 to 1, that first mega ranch is obviously going to be the hardest to implement, right? All right, well, when I bring Meati home for the first time, how should I serve it? Do you guys have favorites? This is for all of you guys.
I would say some of them are flavored, and it's kind of intuitive, but treat it like you would a piece of chicken or a piece of meat. And I mean, I would serve it with mushrooms, but that's just me. It makes sense. No, just treat it like you normally would. I mean, you know, when you're cooking at home, at least when I'm cooking at home, I'm not making fancy dishes. There's a couple of sides and starches and protein, and so I would treat it that way. Yeah. My
favorite is off the grill. Love putting it on the grill. It really absorbs a lot of the charcoal flavor. I mean, it's simple and it's pretty easy.
That's the one thing. It does absorb a lot. So, you know, if you love chili crunch, which like half the world does right now, it's just great to cook it and, you know, kind of marinate it in some chili crunch and add some other vegetables to it. It's
maybe throw it on a Sweetgreen salad. I don't know.
There you go.
It'd be delicious on a salad. I mean, I personally like the breaded crispy Meati. I just think the texture is so incredible. You know, you can eat it by itself in a sandwich. I'm actually heading from here straight to the Hattie B's X Meati pop-up to taste it for lunch. So.
And in our remaining few seconds, I just want to point out that what is so interesting is that entrepreneurship, as you know, can be a very lonely journey. And yet here, among the three of you, I see such amazing camaraderie and community and support. You know, I mean, Tom, you met Tyler, I guess you said through Nick. You guys have all come together and rallied. Tyler, tell us like what that support and camaraderie and just knowledge transfer means for you as an entrepreneur.
It means everything. The fact that these two are willing to take time out of their busy lives to come and talk about what we're doing at Meati means a lot. You know, when we first met, you know, I had, you know, the first product iterations, they tried it, they believed in it, they were willing to support us and what we're trying to do. They've been connecting us with other folks in the space. I don't think Meati is here today, to be honest, without the support of these two and you know, folks in our group.
Great. Any final thoughts from any of you guys before we let out?
And listen, we have one planet that we're living on, and we need to make sure that you know, we're going to produce food in a sustainable manner, and it helps when it's delicious.
Great, thank you so much. And we want to remind the audience that you can get samples of Meati right across the way here. Thank you so much for joining us and for all of your great questions. We hope you guys have a great visit and great afternoon.